A very good afternoon to all of you and welcome to another session with me, Deepthi. What are we going to discuss about today? Well, before discussion, let me take you through an example. When was the last time you approached someone for a handshake and the person, instead of shaking hands with you, bowed in front of you? Strange, isn't it? Well, unfortunately, maybe we were not able to understand why did this person do so. The answer is very simple. For all practical purposes, this person belonged to a different culture altogether. So, interesting, isn't it? That communicating to one another in different forms is what we call as cross-culture communication, which is the topic for today. Cross-culture communication, that is a tool for managers to succeed globally. Let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever tried to analyze what culture in the first place is? If you're thinking to your own self, so while you're thinking, I will help you with it. Culture is nothing but, it is the lens through which you get to view the world. It is central of what you see. And now, if you have to put yourself, you see things differently from another person, which is perfectly right. Because projection is absolutely perception. Or what you perceive is what you project. How you make sense of what you see and how you express your own self. So when we say we express ourselves in a defined manner or in a defined form, we definitely carry a lot of culture along with it. Let us look very carefully into a few aspects of what culture imbibes. Culture imbibes age, different cultures, ethnicity, background, country where we belong to, the gender, and the customs. Different kind of people behave differently. In different cultures, different beliefs, different attitudes, with different genders, and so on and so forth. Rather than me dwelling on all these different aspects of culture, let me quickly take you through the cross-culture communication that prevails in this universe. Why is it so necessary that we have to understand why cross-culture has become so pertinently important in our lives? The reason is globalization. Let us look around us and see a few years down the line, there was a time that nothing mattered to us. We used to behave and we still behave identically with everyone and anyone whom we meet. Typical stereotyping. But the reality is all of us belong to different areas, different fraternities and different thinking modes. Most important, different cultures, different countries and backgrounds. If we have to gel with one another on a global platform, it is imperative that we understand how cross-culture moves. So let me take you through that window. How do you define cross-culture? It is interaction or comparing two or more cultures trying to understand their beliefs and their norms. A very simple example that I had quoted before I began the session. And that is, what if you want to shake hands with someone and this person ends up bowing in front of you? Well, the answer, as I said, was very simple. He belongs to a different culture. Which culture did he belong to? Well, he could be belonging to a Japanese or a Chinese culture where bowing their heads in front of the people whom they interact with is a sign of respect. But what if I am not aware of this? So it becomes a point of humiliation. I may not be able to respond to that in the correct way, nor is the other person going to understand why have I not reacted in that way that he expected me to. When we look into cross-culture, it is nothing but understanding beliefs and norms. Let me give you another very simple example. The number 13, according to the Hindu mythology, as well as Indian typical thinking, is supposed to be considered absolutely unsacred, or I would say it is not at all lucky. Whereas there is this community, that is a Jewish community, for whom this number 13 is absolutely auspicious. Look at the varied thinking that people have and the varied movements that these denominations do. Let us look into certain fundamentals of cultural differences, that is, what is different. One, the communication style, which is very visible. Handling conflicts, which is again very visible. Decision-making styles, as well as approaches to know each other. These elements and these patterns of cross-culture communication are certain aspects which are visible on the exterior, physically noticeable too. But there are certain aspects which are not so visible, which are hidden. Let us look into that. What is hidden below the surface is the beliefs, the values, expectations, and yes, the attitude. It is a little difficult to understand somebody's inert attitude or somebody's value systems until and unless I do not get into the conversation mode with that person, which only typically means that if I have to look at this particular tree as a cultural pattern, fundamental pattern, then I see there are certain visible cultural differences and there are certain invisible cultural roots too. The visible ones, that is, the way I communicate, the way I handle conflicts, the way I make decisions, and how I approach the other person is obviously a dormant style of communicating with each other. But on the other hand, there are invisible cultural roots which cannot be expressed openly, which can be expressed or known only if I continuously get to speak to the person, or maybe sometimes even after communication, I may not get very close to understanding their beliefs, values, expectations and attitude. For understanding of those elements, a deep, intricate, detailed study is a must. Let us go further. Let us now look into a concept called as relationship building, where cross-culture communication is concerned. Relationship building. What is so important about relationship building? The organizational expectation is that developing cross-culture communication skills is to only build up professional relationships. Well, yes, if you have to look around, because of the purpose and because of the reasons of globalization, we see there is absolute momentum, in fact a very speedy momentum of relationships between and within different kinds of countries. Thanks to our orientation now, it is much more easier to connect and to gel with people of varied cultures and in a much easier way. Style of approach with different styles of personalities and understanding regional differences. Let me give you a piece of information. It is classically known that there are 16 different types of personalities prevalent in this entire world. How often have you actually come across somebody who just belongs identically to your own personality? You might be wondering right now. Yes, with this particular statement, we all start wondering, is it possible that we come across our type of personality? The ratios are 50-50. And imagine that if you do not find the same personality person in your own culture, how prominently is it possible that you find the same type of personality of a person in a different culture? Well, cross-culture communication, understanding their pertinent reasons is the only reason why we are discussing this today, so that it helps us to focus more on those grey areas which we do not actually pay attention to when we are communicating to different communities. This is a very typical definition of communication which you must have gone through over and over again. But why am I doing it today? Well, the reason is very simple. Communication in its own self is the way you talk to people, the way you interact with people. But the more important part is, communication is not what I only speak. Communication is what the other person understands. So if the Chinese or the Japanese man were trying to communicate to me their respect while they were bowing, for me the understanding was, why are they doing it to me? It's as simple as that. So communication on one side is not only delivery, but on the other side, it even entails feedback. Communication is the sending of a message from a source to a receiver with the least possible loss of meaning. So, this means that the communication process should ideally be the speaker sending a message that is in some kind of a code. Well, do we all speak in codes? The answer is yes. Codes means any language, any verbal, non-verbal signature, sign, symbol, which according to me is correct. But how do I know whether you understood it and decoded it correctly? The answer to this is also very simple. The minute I get the feedback the way I want to, I can realize and understand that the person whom I'm interacting with, that is a receiver, has been able to successfully decode my message. Encoding only classically means speaking what you want to, whereas decoding only means the way it has been understood. Our only intention while we speak and communicate to people is that we should be understood correctly so that the communication does not get misconstrued, misunderstood, or it just does not get filtered. The listener decodes the message, responds thereby, giving the speaker feedback. Sometimes the feedback may be immediate, sometimes it may be deferred. Right now, while I am communicating to you, maybe the feedback is immediately, yes, we agree to what you're saying. Or probably the feedback may be, no, we do not understand what you're saying. But right here, while I am recording this lecture for you, did I get any feedback from you? The answer is obviously a no. But what I believe is, if at all, if whatever I am communicating falls in the same line of your understanding, then the cause of concern automatically becomes very, very less. Let us look further. What are the different codes of communication? Classically, this question can also be put in, what are the simple elements or the vital V's of communication? Words, that is a part of verbal communication. Voice, yes, voice which acts very loud, very clear, and the most important personality maker when you start communicating to someone. What are the non-verbal communication cues that you get from people? Eye contact, gestures, facial expressions, personal appearance, and obviously the kinesthetic element of communication, that is touch. Ask your own self, have you all been communicating in the same form that we see it? Yes, the answer is yes. We do it on a daily basis. But the only difference while we do this is that we probably do not pay attention as to what is verbal and what is non-verbal. Let us look into this further. We are now going to look into classic countries who understand verbal communication in one form and non-verbal communication in another form. If you see very keenly, this is a triangle which is converted upside down. The higher arena, which contains Japanese, Arabs, Latin Americans, Italians and British. This is that segment which we call as the high context culture. Now when I say high context culture, what do I mean by this? It's a very simple thing. High context culture only simply means these people living under this kind of a bracket, they are very high on non-verbal expressions, which only classically means, if I have to take you back to the previous slide, the people living in the high bracket of the particular triangle, they communicate more often through eye contact, gestures, facial expressions, their appearance and the feeling of touch. Let me tell you something very interesting. People in the US of A aren't very comfortable with hugging each other, or rather any other culture person hugging them. Even shaking hands is something to be thought of, if at all, if you are into a professional relationship with them, then you have to think twice before you make any contact. Moving down, let's look into the low context culture. People down here, that means from the French, North Americans, Scandinavians, Germans and Swiss. Now what happens with them? They are those classic people who believe in the low context culture wherein they are very low on their non-verbal expressions, but they are very high on their verbal expressions. Now, taking you back again, if they are very high on the verbal expressions, it only classically means they use more of their words and they are very prominent on their voice. So when I say voice, they are very upfront by the way they throw across their pitches, they are very comfortable with tone, modulation of their voice and so on and so forth. Let us look at this very beautiful activity which is on cross-culture communication, and this will help you to understand exactly why is it so necessary that we understand how people in various places, various countries behave. If at all, if you were in India and if you see somebody gesticulating in this manner, that is a typical like this, what does this indicate to you? If I have to take a simple understanding, it only to me means good, excellent, very nice. Or for somebody who's probably into dance, this formation is known as a mudra. So if at all, if it's a Bharatanatyam dancer, she or the person who's dancing will definitely emote this way, trying to express a mudra. For somebody else, it would be, I'll be there at 3 p.m. Or probably somebody else would decipher this as, a 0. In India, if there can be so many combinations of thoughts, then have you given it a thought? What will this mean in other cultures? What would this mean in different other countries? That's a wild guess. Let me show you. In the USFA, it simply means, okay, so in case if you ever get an opportunity to go there, don't be carried away by this kind of an expression says, okay, this man thinks my work is excellent, or it's a fantastic thing, or probably this person is gesticulating a mudra. No, the clear-cut answer is, in the USFA, this particular symbol only means it's just okay. Japan. If you ever been to Japan, this kind of an expression only means money. How much? What is this currency? Let's say suppose if you are in the market and if you intend purchasing this, and if you have to gesticulate asking, how much is this for? So this sign is a classic symbol for asking, what is the currency? How much money does it cost? Russia? Very, very simple to understand. It is a plain simple 0. There is no background to it. Brazil, a country which believes that this particular symbol is a symbol of insult. This is an ideal symbol of abuse. So please beware that if at all, if you are ever meeting anybody from this particular country, this particular zone, you have to be very careful that this particular indication only means insult to them. The gesture is the same, but the meanings and the connotations of that differ from person to person, culture to culture, country to country, place to place. Let's take another activity of the similar kind. Again, cross-culture communication. If I have to gesticulate like this, let's say suppose you are probably speaking to someone and someone outside also wants your attention. You might probably do this and gesticulate, give me some more time and I'll be there. Let's say suppose you're in the market and somebody gesticulates like this. Probably for all practical purposes, it may mean this is worth ₹5. Or if you just do this, then in other countries, what would it mean? Let's take a look. In Egypt, it simply means, please be patient, hold on, hang on there. In Greece, it simply means, that's just perfect, exactly what I was looking for. Italy, what exactly do you mean by saying this? Now just imagine one simple expression, one simple gesture, and look at the number of expressions that this can have. Look at the number of meanings that it can generate. Now, looking into the very vital aspect of this session, why do you think is cross-culture so important? And is an adaptation towards cross-culture or is an orientation towards cross-culture so important? Then why is it so? The first reason is, we've already discussed this, it is globalization. Fortunately for all of us, the world is shrinking day by day. Now when I say shrinking, does not mean in size, it only means in distance. We have been really impressive in our approach towards other countries. And so have other countries approached us. Our communication is widened. How does it get widened? Thanks to our relationships with the countries that we are following for trade-related purposes or probably for socio-cultural relationships. Because of which, the size of the world has shrunk. When we say shrunk, it is easier now for me to adapt to different cultures and different varieties of people, and so is it easy for them to do the same. Apart from globalization, there are lots of business opportunities. Now, when we say business opportunities, it only classically means employment purposes. Look at the number of doctors that we have who travel down every year from your own country, that is India, to various other countries, maybe the USFA or maybe Australia or even UK for that matter. Don't you think we are building up relationships and it is much more easier for adaptation now? The answer initially, orientation was not possible. But today we have become much more aware and more than that, we are ready to accept. Acceptance and adaptation. When that happens with a lot of interest, attention towards understanding what the person means to tell us becomes very high. And when that becomes very high, it is very easy to bond and relationships become extremely lucid and clear. Improves the contribution of employees in a very diverse workplace. Diverse? Yes, diverse not because of anything else, but simply because of different kind of cultures. An Indian traveling down all the way to Germany or an Indian traveling down all the way to Saudi Arabia or an Indian traveling down to Indonesia, South Africa, and so on and so forth. What is the most important thing that comes to his or her mind? Will I be able to gel there? What if I am not able to understand certain things? Will this food be able to be palatable to me, or will I be able to adapt to the different cultures? The answers are always very dicey and tricky. To take care of this, it is very important that we understand this concept in totality. It is very easy. If you understand cross-culture communication, it is very easy to share the views and the ideas. For obvious reasons, because now both the people of both different cultures are on the same platform, they are following the same tangent, and there is no digression of thoughts. There is talent improvisation. Now, what do you mean by talent improvisation? Talent improvisation only means there is a importance given to how can I hone up on my skills and how can you be a part in order to help me to hone up my skills. While you're doing this, you can easily see there is a lot of interaction, there is a lot of give and take happening, and each other's areas of weaknesses can be covered. But for this, it is imperative that I am able to understand what the other person wants me to and perform. More than that, improvise on it. An understanding of the diverse market. When I say diverse market, yes, the market is increasing day by day, not only in size but in all other aspects. And it is not a simple homogeneous market, it is a heterogeneous market which is absolutely diverse because there are multicultural things coming up. Let us look further. When we say it is very, very important that we understand cross-culture communication, where there is a flip side too. Every coin has got two sides, the pros and the cons. Now, why is it so difficult for us to adapt to cross-culture communication? The answers are plenty, are in abundance. Let us admit one thing, that we become very, very stuck upon on our thoughts. And there are certain blocks which stop me from understanding cross-culture communication and adapting to it very easily. What are those typical things that come across as roadblocks to cross-culture communication? Let's start from the very beginning. The first block is ethnocentrism. This is a typical syndrome wherein a person from a different culture feels, I am correct and this is it has to be. Nothing can change here. Now when you start having this kind of an approach, it becomes extremely difficult to adapt to anybody else. You can't be stuck upon to certain things and say, no, this is the way it has to be and I think this is the correct way that I am right and I am not going to change. Extremely difficult to bend, extremely difficult to get inside the nitty-gritties, and the relationships becomes very, very hard. Moving on to the second block, it is nothing but stereotyping. Now let's understand one thing. We stereotype people when we see identical formats. Let's say suppose you must have come across one particular Japanese who probably has the habit of drinking tea along with his food. Well, Japanese classically love to have green tea along with the food. But there is a simple thing to it too. Not all Japanese would love to do it. In case if they're in India, they instead of preferring tea would probably go in for a soft drink. Can you start stereotyping that no, everyone who belongs to Japan, everyone who comes and has food here or everyone who's at the dining table will definitely appreciate having tea? The answer is no. We have to stop blocking people's mind, stop coloring our own images, stop coloring our own thoughts in such a fashion that we are not able to explore the other side. There are lots of people who may belong to the same culture, but they may think, they may behave, and they may act differently. Let us even understand that element. The other block to culture communication or cross-culture communication is discrimination. Now, discrimination in its word itself is so well beautifully understood. When you discriminate is when you become biased. Now, when you become biased is when you become judgmental. What happens when you become biased and judgmental? Well, the simple answer is, I will only think that that part is correct and I will discriminate the others from it. If at all, if I have a classic group of people who agrees to me, then that means I belong to that fraternity. If at all, if I think that there is another group who does not believe in whatever I say, I'll simply bar them off. Don't you think that's the wrong thing to do? How can we have discriminations when you're talking about cultures? in that case, it is much more important and it becomes in fact much more necessary that I break open those codes and bring everyone together. Now, how do you do that? It's a very simple thing. You have to learn to get onto the same platform, talk averagely and talk about those things which are common between the two people. In fact, I am again going to reiterate what I said. You are not supposed to speak and talk what you wish and you want to. You have to communicate and speak and talk about those things which people want you to speak. Ideally speaking, we all love to talk and we would want to talk about those things that we find is correct. But the reality is, and the heart-pinching fact is that, is the receiver ready to receive that kind of information? The most probable answer would be not all, because we all think differently. Let us move ahead and see the other roadblocks. We have typical problems called as cultural blindness. Now, what does the cultural blindness concept mean? Well, cultural blindness classically means I am short. I don't want to learn. I do not want to change. I am happy the way I am. And why should I change my culture? If at all, if somebody has to change, then the other person would. Is it so simple? The answer is no. For any relationship, be it personal or professional, there has to be a compromise and there has to be an accommodation every time. You bend a little and so will I. Now, when we say that, it only simply means that I am ready to put my entire effort in bringing up this relationship. But it is not going to be possible if you try doing this single-handedly. There is something called as tone difference. Well, all of us speak in different tones and the tonality is unfortunately not the common element when we talk to people. So, be it words, be it the voice, the tonality matters a lot. Some people speak very harshly. Well, they don't mean anything. In that culture, that is the commonest thing that they do. Certain cultures, you see people speak very softly. You think they are very prim proper and they have absolute business etiquette or they're very sweet to talk to. But maybe for all practical purposes, that is what their culture says. For that matter, turn around and see how many diverse religions do we have in India itself. Be it a person who speaks Marathi, be it a person who speaks Gujarati, maybe a person down from the north or down there from the south. Don't we all speak in different ways? Methodologies that are followed in using a tonality becomes so different. And right here, I am talking to you about cross-culture. And imagine the immense amount of work that we need to do to understand different cultures. Such a small little session, and for me to take you entirely into the deep-rooted nitty-gritties of which country, which culture, which particular language has got a high tonality or a low tonality will be very difficult to be squeezed in. But I'll try my level best to see to it that I can give you the most in this particular element. And the last, of course, is the cultural imposition. That means this is the way it is, whether you like it or you don't, has to be. And if you don't like it, you may please walk out. Now imagine that if you are stuck with this kind or glued with this kind of an ideology that this is the way it has to be and it becomes imposed on you, it will be very difficult for you to adapt. People living in different cultures will also have to understand that in order to connect with the other person, you have to learn to bend. You have to learn to give up something and be acceptable to change. Let's go further. We are going to now look at skills in order to overcome the differences that we've seen. Now, if I say differences, it only means if I am facing the roadblocks of cross-culture communication, let me give you some tips in how can this be reduced. First, in order to handle others, it is absolutely needed that you keep your head and your heart in the right place. How do you do that? It is said when you handle your own self, you have to use your head. Now, when you use your head, it only typically means be much more sane, be much more pragmatic, be much more rational in your approach. But when you have to handle others, use your heart. When I say using your heart, it simply means get close to feelings. People understand feelings. People understand care. People understand affection. So, in case if you keep your hand on somebody's shoulder who's probably suffered or gone through a death of a close family member, believe me, even if you've not said a single word, the message goes clearly to the person. That means, I'm there with you. I understand what you're going through. please don't worry, things will be alright. When you handle others, it is only your heart and your emotion that works majorly. The next skill to overcome the difference is respecting the differences and working together. Well, this is a classic statement which says, you are right in your way, I am right in my own way. We both belong to different universes of thinking, different models of behavior. And while we say that, it only means I will not choke you with my issues and you should not be choking me with your issues. Let us come together and bond together on a common platform, which will only help you and me to dwell into more of the working aspect or the professional aspect rather than getting into the personal integrities of discrimination or stereotyping or cultural imposition. Then it becomes much more easier. Building trust across cultural boundaries. Well, trust is the foundation to any relationship. Believe me on this, that in case if you do not trust and rely on the person whom you are talking to, it becomes absolutely difficult to steer any other information. Understanding body language. We just took a look at the non-verbal cues, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. Just a small little suggestion to all of you. In case if you're looking out at more orientation on how do you behave with cross-culture communication with different people, please go through certain books or use a material which is easily available on the Google to find out different forms of gesticulations, expressions, be it facial, and try and understand the difference in the cultures of different countries. It becomes absolutely empowering to understand body language. Just the two little gestures that you saw, didn't you see that it means so different to so many different people? It is definitely an eye-opener. The last, of course, if I need to overcome differences, the first thing that I need to do is connect with people. And to connect with people, the most simplest thing that you need to do is simply talk, communicate. How? Well, if you know the language, if you know the culture, it becomes easier. But if you don't, then you got to work behind it.